Hello, neighbors. Let's have some more story time with Ophelia Immune. Because story time is what I need in my life. So I'm going to force it on you as well. And I can't force other people's stories on you because of copyright. So here we are, very little preface, picking up in Ophelia Immune, chapter called The Training. I built Swan, a training dummy, out of light metal scraps and shredded plastic that I salvaged while she was distracted with a breakfast tea and rat bacon that I made for her every night for a week. While she sat sipping and munching, I lurked into the shadows of mostly empty, snoring buildings, my body pressed up against holes in walls and slouching away with any rebar or tangles of wire that I could drag quietly. For the head of the pretend zombie, I stuffed tattered plastic bags and moldy paper flyers inside of an old, tied-off, doll-sized t-shirt that wasn't warm enough for any baby to wear. The neck was a short coil of thick, rebraided and repaired rope. So any time she knocked the head off, I could just recoil it. The zombie dummy swayed back and forth on its overturned garbage can stand with a broken broom handle body. Swan was a quick student after I convinced her to leave her heavy rolling pin behind in favor of the fire poker that I had stolen for her. The wrought iron poker was longer and sturdier, extending her reach beyond the length of her still-growing arms. To make up for her short arms and sprouting legs, she bounced and jumped wildly as she struck at the training dummy. She sprinted as fast as she could towards the unbalanced decoy and then stopped short, rapidly tiptoeing and hopping, the baby t-shirt head barely lolling off as she leapt in front of it, with the very end of her poker thrashing wildly. After 23 attempts, she hit the head square on, and it dangled off to the side of the rope coil neck. She shrieked with joy and pumped her fists in the air, losing control of her weapon and sending it clattering to the ground. Not bad, not bad, I confirmed, replacing the head and neck. But settle down and regain your weapon. That would have been a blow to the zombie's skull, but let's see if you can take the head off at the neck. We'll work on skull smashing later. Control before power, like Dad always said. She stooped to retrieve her poker and tried rushing the dummy again. She still stopped awkwardly in front of the fake beast, her legs spread wide at the ankles, jumping to a strange height while swinging. But this time she hit the rope neck instead of the head. She knocked it apart at a nice angle and barely nicked the plastic shoulder on her way down. Bravo, bravo, I clapped. That was an excellent swing, but the entire body would have fallen on top of you. Don't stop in front of it. You need to leap past the zombie, and then, after you knock the head off, you have to destroy the brains. We can practice on this rotten frozen cabbage. She glared down at the counterfeit undead head. She stood directly above it and clobbered it, 6 or 7 times, mashing it into a festering slaw. She rested her victorious hands on her hips and gazed into the cluttered sky above our heads. Feels good, doesn't it? I asked. Her eyes gleamed at me with satisfaction of defeating something that had been terrorizing her for years. She licked her peeling lips, looking around for more to do. But, I added, your swings are wasting energy. Diagonals are better. Slamming straight down is a finishing move. Go for the temple or top corner of a head, and it keeps you in motion. She nodded, soaking it all up, lungs full of fresh night air. So I tried using my lungs, too, to feel some of the soothing, cool breeze. But my chest rattled and wheezed. I shuddered. Swan shrugged, not as scared as she should be of any zombie noises anymore. Don't be so cavalier. This is dangerous work. Now try a frozen raccoon. Not all zombie heads are as small as that cabbage. She swung at everything that I gave her until her shoulders were tired and her swings grew slower and sloppier. She yawned. I had forgotten that building up muscles was hungry and sore work. When Dad had taught me how to pike heads, I had sprained my left shoulder. Mom had wrapped me in our only untorn blanket and fed me broth for a week before she'd let Dad take me outside again. What I had now was worse than a sprained shoulder, but Swan should go and eat dinner and stretch. I gave her the sliced and diced raccoon that she had practiced on. I was going to have to find her something else to chop as more practice soon, something more difficult than even frozen flesh. Dad had always given me chunks of firewood. Maybe plastic, cardboard, or frozen ice would work, but things were about to start thawing. We were in spring. A late freeze couldn't last forever. I could have her lift garbage into the dumpster for a few hours. That would build muscles and character, cleaning up the city for those who couldn't or wouldn't. But there would be a time for those lessons after she slipped off this one. Go inside and start a fire. Rest. You earned it. Have some dinner. I'll be back in a couple hours with a reading lesson. She ran to throw her arms around me in a full embrace, but I stopped her with my hammer extended. No, I said. Be more careful. Don't touch things that are infected, especially me. Her face fell for a moment, but then she gazed up at me and smiled lopsidedly. She stretched out one mittened hand and patted my elbow. I longed to pull her mittens from their fingers and breathe on them with warmth enough to take away the late spring chill, with nothing in my mouth that could kill her. Instead, I nudged her with my gloved knuckles. Go on inside and get warm, I urged her away, and don't burn the books. Okay, Ophelia. She shoved her mismatched sneakers inside of our building, waved at me over her shoulder as she went. I'll see you later. I pushed the dummy off to the side of the alleyway. Probably nobody would bother it. It was made out of garbage that nobody wanted in the first place. Plus, I threw a ragged biohazard sheet over it. It looked like lumpy infected trash. The safest way to hide anything. Nobody wanted that. I waited until I could see the dim lights in Swan's window before picking up my complete works of Catherine James. See you later, family. I waited until I could see the dim lights in Swan's window before I picked up my complete works of Catherine James for the front stoop and set off for the clinic. I had made 2 dummies for Jim out of supplies that he borrowed, without permission, from his clinic. Twisted cardboard for arms and legs, inflated plastic gloves for heads, things that turned out to be almost as useful for training gear as they were for kindling. Jim was waiting for me in the flickering glow of the red exit sign above the clinic, with a new blue and yellow wool cap rolled down over his ears. Its thick, lumpy, bunchy style matched the green, brown, and orange sweater that he was also wearing under his lab coat. The bright colors looked like the clothes that Mom used to make when she was learning how to knit. I wondered if maybe his great-aunt, who had raised him in her high-rise, had made the new layers for him. He talked about her sometimes, how she took care of him and gave him everything that she had. I wondered how much more yarn she owned, how much other stuff she could buy, how much other stuff I could take if I robbed her. But I banished the thought. I like Jim, and he pays me for training and blood with reading lessons and hot coffee. I can't rob his great-aunt. I heaved my book at him and retrieved the training dummies from behind the dumpster. Jim struggled and stumbled to catch the gigantic book, but he didn't let my precious tome touch the ground. His arms didn't falter. He had been doing his prescribed exercises. He read to me as I dragged the dummies into a realistic formation, one following the other towards him and the clinic door. I inflated my lungs and used the air to fill the zombies' poppable heads. I leaned against a twisted cardboard shoulder to listen, clicking my tongue appreciatively. He taught me to snap rhythmically when I liked a sonnet, but my gloves were still on. I traded him my homework for a thermos full of coffee. My pencil marks read O-P-H-E-L-I-A in shaky handwriting. On the farm at home, I knew when something was mine. There was no need to make marks on it or waste my crayons to make a label. After learning most of the alphabet, I still couldn't understand why my name wasn't O-F-E-E-L-E-A. E's are my favorite, curly and wiry like me. But there was something to be said for the variety of letters in my name, as Jim spelled it, and he said that it was rooted in the pages. I like the pages. And maybe my parents had liked the pages too. Why hadn't they taught me how to read? Why hadn't their sacrifice even kept me alive? Why had they left me to wander the earth, lonely and decrepit? Jim folded my paper into his back pocket to correct later. Let's see what you've practiced. I nudged him towards the dummies. He walked firmly towards the first with his reinforced crutch raised high. We had taped and retaped some scalpel blades to the wide armpit end, which he swung at the inflated latex heads. They popped with a bang as he confidently proceeded from one to the other. He was too slow and measured, but he remembered all of his technique. What if there were more of them? I quizzed. I would keep my head about me and take the closest one first and smash all of the skulls afterwards. And you would walk backwards while you were swinging. Where could you climb? On the dumpster, for one. You'd be stuck there if there were too many zombies. If you couldn't keep up with the hacking, you could always head for the clinic door or a fire escape. Don't get trapped and keep moving. Look behind you. How are your arms doing? Jim held a bicep up for me to see. When I was unimpressed, he did a few push-ups, a handstand against the brick wall, and a pull-up on the fire escape. I sat down a box of cotton swabs and alcohol pads. I opened up the steaming thermos and sipped at it while Jim pushed the headless fakes back behind the dumpster. He leaned against the blunt end of his crutch, retrieving my letter from his pocket. Well, I asked hopefully, how is that cure coming along? Oh, about as well as your letters, he chided me. Half finished and barely viable. I rolled my eyes with great effort and moaned. Coffee gurgled from the bottom of my gullet. He laughed happily. At least I'm not as slow as you are, I glowered from under my softly bristled hat, which I pulled farther over my eyes. Any more luck finding more immune people, like me? He shook his head and concentrated on the notes he was making. There may not be any others like you, Ophelia. He patted my shoulder in consolation. Don't, I said. Don't touch me. I can't touch anybody. Not unless you find others like me. I shouldn't even be around you. I'm sorry, Ophelia. If I hear anything, I'll let you know. He clicked his pen closed, not patting me anymore, putting the paper between us. So here, I drew you a picture of a snowflake with the word for this month, April, and next month, a raindrop for May. Keep working on the word for stop, which you see on all of these red signs. And I want you to try and discover the word for radio in the next few days. Look at windows and boxes. See if you can figure it out yourself. He handed my paper back to me so that I could use the reverse side. We didn't waste what little paper we had. I dripped some blood into a vial for him, and less uncomfortably full, I bid him good night. Until tomorrow! He blew a kiss in my direction, gazing out of his backlit doorway, reaching for a clipboard full of papers. Good morning, I whispered, yawning into my scarf. Swan's lights were out when I arrived in the rising dawn. Juliet was curled around her empty water dish. I filled her bowl, scratched her lightly behind the ears, and checked her tether and the nails by the window for rough spots. Finding none, I crawled into my closet and cuddled my large brown book through the hours of long daylight until it was late enough to wake Swan for the night. Knock. Thud, thud, thud. Knock. Oh, I hope there isn't a zombie at my door, Swan hollered through the locked wood, and then opened it. Oh, no, she cast a hand across her mouth. It is a zombie. I groaned. She jiggled out of the rhythm of our secret knock, and with a swing of one arm, she struck a match, lighting the propane burner that stood on the floor between us. Though I noticed that the night was rather balmy, almost warm, moist and tepid. We hardly needed the extra heat of the burner or hot water. I'm so glad spring is coming around, she cooed, handing me a mug. We sipped on sweet berry and nettle tea and sharpened our flimsy yellow pencils against my blade. Pointy tools in hand, blankets on our laps, we practiced our new letters first on the floor, scrawling April and May in a corner not often used, next to the marks from when we had learned our names and the days of the week. The floorboards were the flattest, smoothest surface that we had. The paper we only used for final drafts. Swan's letters were thicker and straighter than my narrow, curly ones, but she broke the tip of her pencil repeatedly and could never sharpen it to as fine of a point. I told her that our assignment, before I could get us more paper and more new words to learn, was to find out how to spell radio. She looked up. Ophelia, where do you get the words that we learn? Oh, just a source that I know. A source? Why won't you tell me? Because he's none of your business, and I don't want... Aha! I knew you had a secret man. She threw one of her rag pillows at me. I do not have a secret man, and be quiet if you want to learn any more new words. She sighed at my frown and copied April onto the floor for the 37th time. She always wrote her words inside of a shape that she outlined thickly on the floor in front of her, wasting precious pencil lead. This time it was a heart. Sunday had been a star. Thursday, a rainbow. I practiced spelling words in straight lines, alphabetical order, when there was more than one. I wasn't going to take her to meet Jim. She couldn't come with me to the clinic every night. I couldn't train and look out for 2 humans at once, nor have her interrupting my sonnets. I didn't want her to feel badly that she didn't have as many warm clothes or as much food as Jim, nor for her to tell him where and how we lived. I wouldn't watch them get married and move into a big apartment building with doors and no zombie experts around. Swan was too young, and Jim wasn't ready to protect her yet. They probably wouldn't even like each other if they met. It would be dangerous and could easily lead to their deaths. So I would keep them apart. But I would share the spelling lessons with her. Reading was as important as the training I was giving. Get your best running shoes, I told her. It's still early. We should go looking for radio before all the shops close and pull down the metal shutters. The sun was about to go down behind the tall, tired buildings that frame our neighborhood as we spilled outside. Our neighbors spoke to each other with the northern words that made no sense to me, but I thought that I could understand their tone. Yes, I got the can of beans. Did you remember the propane? Oh, I forgot. Better go now before the store closes. Okay, well, save me some beans. Good night, neighbor. Good evening, friend. Have a good day. Shut the door before we all freeze in here. Such a blessing that not many of the creatures have defrosted yet. Dusk was slow, or maybe the moon was rising. I couldn't tell over the rooftops, but I could see some of the squatters that I had only known by voice. They had their hoods pulled down over their faces, almost as far as we did. It's still very light out, I cautioned Swan. She swung her poker around and around her head. She knocked it into a metal vent with a clang. Dark enough, she said, flailing towards a dumpster. She scarred it lengthwise with the tip of her poker. Her iron screeched along the rusty steel. I grabbed the weapon away from her. Shh! Be quiet! I gave it back with a stern look. She took it and fell in line with my shoulders, prancing to keep up. Let's go west first on the smaller streets, closer to the river, I instructed in hushed tones. Better than the bigger, busier streets. Okay. Swan gulped at a wadded-up piece of cardboard with her poker, bashing the pavement with a loud bang. I grabbed it from her and threw it on the ground with a growl. Be quiet or stay home. You're being dangerous. I heard the low scrape of her picking it up off the pavement and then the quiet padding of her steps behind me. She'd recover. I had gotten that lecture many times. A patrol, even just for words, is no time for playing. I kept my pace brisk, glancing from side to side at every intersection. She fell behind me as we crept west around our neighborhood and into the market district. Silence settled around us, crouched behind 2 barrels piled high with ash. Swan leaned and peered, squirming from side to side to see, her eyes and ears eventually settling on what I was tracking. There was an electronics store, with radios and other electrical machines in the window. The cords snaked around each other and back to an outlet in the wall behind the display. Packages of batteries littered the staging area. Some of the little devices glowed, some of them blinked, and some of them moved from side to side, all of their gears fidgeting just as much as Swan. The shop attendant locked the front door around the customers who were already inside. He wasn't going to let anybody else in before he closed for the night. We wouldn't have long to wait before we could peek safely in the window with no one else around. Yes, this is an electronics store. They definitely sell radios here. Let's go find the word. Swan bounded towards the store, poker dangling jauntily from her little hand. She turned around when she realized that I wasn't following her, tilting her head. I waved her back to me and the shelter of the ash barrels. She looked around her to all sides. She was already in the middle of the street. She walked defiantly away to press her hands and nose against the store window. The bells on the door jingled, and a large round man with a soiled baseball cap stepped out, looming over her, his fleas and lice falling from his head. Swan jumped, stumbled, and looked defensively at her feet. My muscles tensed as the man leaned in and whispered something into her ear. I left my hiding spot and hurried to her. He walked swiftly away. Did he threaten you? Did he hurt you? Swan looked up at me, grinning. He advised me not to buy anything in there because their merch is crap and their prices are bullshit. You need to be more careful. You need to loosen up. You need to look for the words for radio and numbskull. I tried to laugh despite myself as we leaned into the window together. Maybe she was right. The man hadn't hurt her, and we were now staring at a spectacle of wonders as one would expect two normal human girls to do. There were mechanical lights and lamps with bubbles inside. There was a heating unit that plugged into a wall and had a fan inside of it. The radios were next to a small oven-like pot. I think it starts with an R, Swan squinted at each of the words in turn. I think you're right, and I think it ends with an O. I know that one, she pointed to a 5-letter word that started with an F. It means cold. There! I slapped the window near a big red word on a piece of cardboard. Do you see any other words that start with R and end in O? No, I don't, Swan clapped and bounced. Give me your pencil, let's write it down. I reached for the paper in my pocket and wrote down the word we were looking at while Swan pawed at my sleeve with glee. Don't forget the D! Bells jingled and the shop owner looked out, a hand on his hip, one hand on his potbelly. He looked down his nose at us, slowly rubbed his stubbly chin. You squatter girls get out of here now. We're closed. Pardon me, sir, but can we buy an R-A-D-I-O here? Swan smirked up at him. I said we're closed. He reached for his broom and swatted at us. I jumped aside. Swan caught some bristles to the knees and leapt backwards. I grabbed her and we bumped hard into each other as we yelped, holding arms and retreating down the alleyway near the shop. Swan's shoe was untied and I dropped our paper several times. I struggled to collect it before it blew away. We tripped over each other and collapsed into a pile of scarves and sneakers. I made sure that none of my skin was touching hers before I joined her giggles. She held her hand across her sparse ribs, her back arched, red hair flapping like a curtain, and she waved a finger at my nose. She forced her arms at me like the shopkeeper's broom. I curled up and laughed into my knees, which were surprisingly warm. Happily shocked, I stopped to push my sleeves up and I slid a finger along my arm. It was warm, too. I looked up into a light sprinkle of rain that was falling instead of snow. The drizzles bounced off of my lips and stole none of my heat to melt themselves, but I could still feel a draft. Swan was no longer next to me. She was brushing herself off and heading down the alley to a pile of boxes near a loading dock. Swan! I hissed, spying moving lights around the rainy mist beyond her, and hearing words that I couldn't understand. Swan! Hey, maybe we could find a patch of cardboard to hang in our building that says radio. She waved me off and coughed away the last of her laughter. She was pawing over the boxes by the time I reached her, looking for a patch of garbage that might still say radio. I didn't burn books, but if she managed to find a scrap of cardboard big enough, I wouldn't spare it. We needed to melt the wax off her candles and burn the rest. I grabbed the scuff off her jacket and spun around to focus on the glinting and bobbing lights at the end of the alleyway. The voices grew louder. What's that? She cocked her head and strained her ears. Nothing for us. It's time to get out of here. Can't be sure. She pulled her coat out of my fist, skittering out of arm's reach, plastering herself on the dampening brick corner nearest the loudening murmurs. Oh, Ophelia, just loosen up. I relaxed my lungs, but all I could produce was a deeper, phlegmier rattle. The human voices that I couldn't hear weren't safe. They were gathering. They were swarming. Swan could get hurt. I could get hurt. I needed to retrieve her. As I approached, I closed my eyes to better focus on my ears. I could hear the tide of the pool inside of my chest and Swan's smooth, clear breaths. Around the corner was a crowd of people, 20 or 30 of them, all facing the same direction, away from us, all looking at the same attraction. Something about 30 yards away, something, or things, quiet and scared, something in danger, like us. I motioned to Swan that we would slowly lean around the corner and use our eyes as well as our ears. As we did, I was not the only one who choked on the fluids in my throat. There were 7 little girls of varying heights and shades, arranged left to right on a rashly constructed, uneven stage, shivering in their rags. They were all starved. Some didn't have shoes. A robust man in a dusty business suit hit his gavel on a podium. Another, wearing a wrinkled top hat, stepped up to collect the scrawny girl farthest right. He paid the businessman with a handful of coins and wrapped a blanket around the girl's trembling shoulders. He led her away to a long line of cargo vans that were parked by a valet with a handful of keys. At least she's warm now, I offered. Swan shook harder than the girl who had been sold. The little girls were for sale like apples or tins full of beans. But they were not full of beans. Nobody had been filling them with anything. By the way that they swayed in the breeze, they were barely full of themselves, on discount, empty and sold as is, objects with holes that nobody would patch. One of the girls reached up into the air and lashed out for something that wasn't visible. I knew what she was grabbing for. A cure, a weapon, something to steady herself, an end to the auction. But how could there be a cure for this? What would make people so sick in the first place? A bald man in overalls raised his paddle. A round woman in a grubby shawl raised hers higher. Overalls raised his again, back and forth, until grubby shawl spat on him and stormed away. When he smiled, his teeth were oranger than mine. He grabbed his girl by the arm, pulled her off down the stage, and pressed his mouth on hers. She didn't move away or reach for anything else. She just conceded. Overalls put her in the back of his truck that was waiting in line with the other vehicles. A long caravan streamed down the alleyway, waiting to transport their purchased goods, waiting to collect the little girls. I felt a hand on my jacket. I turned as far as I could strain my neck. I was being held by the electronics shop owner. He had traded his broom for a firm grip on my collar. "Hey," he bellowed with a snort, "I've got 2 more for the sale block." The crowd turned to see us. "I know that one." A filthy man with a crutch waved a fungusy fingernail at Swan. "I already bought this one from her family. That little one is mine." "And I know the other one. She is definitely mine." Uncle Donnie stepped out from the crowd and showed us his yellow teeth, with spinach or something green stuck between them, something rotten. "Yes," he shoved his uneven mustache with a speck of spittle close to my face. "I know this one. She looks just like my first wife. She shot my daughter with a fucking gun in the head. She's mine." His hands were no longer in the miniature pockets of a dirty sweater. He was licking his lips, chapped, clammy slugs, as always. The alcohol in his breath was rougher than moonshine. He traced the orange flower on my sweater right above my left breast bud. I kicked at his arm, but I missed because I was still dangling beneath one of his meaty hams. "Yeah, she's mine," he glared and grinned. "She took my daughter. She ruined my first wife, who died of a broken heart after our daughter. My poor Judy was so messed up after that I couldn't even let her in the house anymore until she got eaten. When I confronted her parents about this little bitch killing my daughter and making me leave my wife outside overnight to get eaten, do you know what they said? They said she'd already run off like the shame that she will be until she finds a decent husband to fix her up. We all missed her then, and now I found her. She already looks half dead, but I bet I could bring her back to life." The crowd cheered for his monologue when he ran a rough hand up the thigh of my jeans. Even through 2 layers of long johns, my skin crawled. "You're not decent," I screamed despite the tight grip on my braids. "And I didn't kill your daughter." "You lying cunt." The spittle from his mustache jumped to my cheek. He clenched my sweater instead of groping at it. "You picked up a pussy little girl's gun, and you splattered shit all over my car. Mine. Do you know how hard that was to clean? And they were mine. I couldn't even punish Judy for it properly, because it had been you ruining my things, and she done gone crazy on your account. And then I couldn't punish you, because you ran away after one little toss in that pitiful stream on your pitiful farm. And you was so ashamed you run off with no words to anyone. But you're mine now. Now I can deal with you the way someone should have a long time ago." He punched my right cheek, but only my scalp tingled where I swung from my hair. He undid his belt buckle, but I didn't miss with my next kick. My foot caught him right in his balls. Swan laughed and twisted against the grip on her own red curls and bit our captor hard on the wrist. He dropped us hard on our feet and screamed next to Uncle Donnie, curled up like a baby on the pavement. The crowd lurched away from our rabid forms, too stunned to grab at any creature who had just drawn blood with its mouth. We scrabbled and ran as fast as we could, before their shock could wear off and they could raise real weapons. We ran, believing that we were being chased, past the rope factory, past the propane fillers, past the still bustling market, past our neighbors returning from jobs that didn't pay them enough to buy the food that they were carrying home, past all of the people we ran, none of them stopping to see if we were okay, all of them just trying to get home as well. Everyone trying to escape from something just as bad, all of them hiding us from anyone who was behind us, less motivated to run as quickly. We didn't stop to see if we were alone until we were panting on the floor with Swan's door locked and blocked behind us. I began packing our most important goods so that we could flee the rampaging Knox that wouldn't be far behind. They would steal Swan, put her up on the stage, and bash my head in, and Juliet's. Swan laughed hysterically, or maybe she was retching. She wiped her mouth on her sleeve and screeched even harder when she saw the blood there. He didn't taste half bad. She braced her ribs against her guffaws. I tried to pull her to her feet. We've got to get out of here. They could have followed us. No, they didn't. She brushed me off. We're all alone, just like the girls on that stage. They don't care enough about us to follow us. I stopped and listened. There were no heavy footfalls trampling up our stairs to capture us. I held my ear to the sealed door, trying to listen for any captors or Swan's sobbing. No one moving faster than a limp was visible in the alleyway out our window. Still, I knew we shouldn't sit and wait for them to track us. They knew you. They knew me. They're coming for us, I rasped, desperate. She just wiped her mouth again. More blood. Is this even mine? Or is it the guy I just took a bite of? She winced at a side pain from laughing, or running, or adrenaline, or being grabbed and hit. What is the whole entire world? I slumped against the wall with no answer for her. How could I tell her that girls got hit or sold or worse all over the countryside, everywhere, in large batches, like cans of creamed corn? Only most canned goods didn't get plowed by bulls who called themselves husbands. And they were coming after us to take care of us because we couldn't take care of ourselves. There was no saving us. It was only a matter of time. Who was that man that wanted to buy you? Did he say you shot somebody? Did he throw you in a stream? Oh, I winced and felt my own surface wounds. That was my Uncle Donnie, but he wasn't really my uncle. He bought my cousin Judy, and then when their kid got bitten, he didn't have the good sense to kill her, so what had I done? What had he said? Was it about that rifle? It was my rifle. I had used it. But hadn't Dad used it to chase me into the stream instead of kindly finishing me off as he should? I ran off after what? What had Donnie said? I had a rifle. I did want to take mercy on Hannah when Donnie was an idiot. With my gun. It had been mine. Donnie had thrown me into that stream. What had he said about my family? They had missed me? Dad had missed me with a gun when he didn't know I was a zombie and also wasn't good enough to kill me with a shot? But if Donnie had thrown me into the stream and the gun was mine... I shook my head to clear it. A small piece of my scalp was flapping loose where I had ripped it as we dangled. It didn't feel as slimy as the place where Donnie had touched my chest. I began to remove my tainted sweater, but I remembered the ragged garments on the girls. They would die for a sweater this warm and nice. I shouldn't cast it aside. I remembered Swan cornered by the 3 men who have sold her on the auction block if I hadn't stopped them. How she would have shivered then. My horrible cousin Judy, married so young, was it even for a good price? Who had been groped by the same beast who had just touched me, had claimed me, would come for me, would come for us. And I couldn't forget all of those girls who wandered the woods and forests alone forever because their families sold them in order to buy food for the rest of the people they tried to cram into their cars or campsites or cabins or condos. How soon will we rejoin the other lost girls? Nobody really ever taking care of anybody else. Well, whatever. You kicked him right in the nuts, Swan pipped, still pink with excitement, so unaware of how close we had just come to her blood being finished flowing. You saved me again. No, I didn't, I said. I really didn't. But I will. We have to? We have to get out of this mess. Her giant eyes got even wider if that was possible. We will? Will we? Yeah, we will. We'll kick and bite all of them. But how? How can we possibly stop them? You're not thinking clearly, I told her, waving a hand in front of her face. She looked up at me, the corner of her mouth still streaked with blood. I hoped that the man she had bitten was healthy. The last thing we needed was some kind of other illness. I dabbed the dark flakes from her puffy lips, starting to bruise from the force of her own attack on that guy's arm. I'm not so fragile, she murmured fiercely, but she was starting to seem a little bit concussed. Her eyes crossed a little, and she vomited a small pool of bubbly stomach acid onto the floor. Oh, there, you are a little bit fragile. I eased her onto her bedroll. She dry heaved, but she didn't have a fever. She'd probably just been handled too roughly. She hadn't eaten yet tonight, and I couldn't feed her now that she might pass out. All I needed was for her to aspirate while I packed us up to leave. If we were going to be destroyed just like everyone else, it at least shouldn't be alone choking on vomit during a head knock seizure. If Uncle Donnie and the Sellers found us tonight, it might as well be together so that they wouldn't even look into my apartment and find Juliet. I lay down next to Swan and wrapped my arms around her, touching only her blanket as she twitched. I could smell her hair through the hat I tucked down around her ears. She smelled of ash soap and nettle tea. She was so warm and so small. Her room was warmer just because she was in it, and she trusted me to be the big sister that I should be. I held her while she convulsed a few more times, chewing on my own lips. How was I going to save us before Donnie and the Sellers found us? Where would we go? Just another apartment building where they'd hunt us down and grab us anyway? How would I save us from this if I couldn't even escape the foulest brute I'd ever been forced to call family? How could we possibly continue to exist in the face of men selling girls, humans selling humans, owning people, hunting people? Zombies were supposed to be the only sometimes missing their hearts. I rose at sundown after Swan had cried herself sound asleep. The last of the sun rays still did not reveal anyone lurking in our alleyway. No unfamiliar neighbors, nobody walking with more than a sack of grains or a can of food in their hands. Everybody anxious to be more safely in their squats before true night. I listened to the hallway through Swan's locked door for 5 minutes before I opened it. Nothing but the dim hallway with shabby flowers twining the walls. The stairs were clear too, empty except for dust bunnies. My own door was locked securely as expected, and Juliet wasn't making any noise. Guilt washed over me, but I offered her no kind words about her boredom. For as long as she lay still, nobody would hear her rustling and try to break past the deadbolts and the shelving. I checked the alley again. Twice more. It was still clear, and Swan was sound asleep, not restless or sickly, and without ever developing a fever. I hardly waited for the shadows to fully cover the ground before I checked her locks, jumped down the fire escape, and left her lying there, nervous that she would wake up alone, but more afraid that I would never find a way for any of us to escape anything at all. Some didactic melodrama. Yeah! So, that was the training of Ophelia Man. My laptop battery's almost dead. I'm gonna go sit by my fire without trying to read through smoke.